March 14, 2023, 9:34 p.m. A frantic woman calls 911. Someone's in the house. The address, a quiet, gated street north of Houston. 12 minutes later, officers step into a mansion with soaring columns and a glass staircase. In the primary bedroom lies the owner, a 56-year-old Dubai Sheikh and real estate developer. His young girlfriend of Indian origin repeats the same line. It was a robbery. The neighborhood was used to high walls and cameras. But that night, the facade of safety cracked, revealing an underside where passion and money hide easily behind the fiction of chance and theft.
He was born into money, and for him, wealth was not a destination, but a baseline. His family's businesses spanned import licenses, logistics contracts, and later minority stakes in energy services that minted reliable cash flow. Early on, he learned that capital moves fastest when managed through people, not proximity. So he built layers of delegated authority and demanded concise updates. By his 30s, he was known as a man who closed on speed and handled risk like a lever. Private bankers appreciated his punctual interest payments and his appetite for distressed assets. Competitors said he could see a path to profit where others only saw litigation and dust.
The first major inflection point came with hospitality. Boutique hotels and serviced apartments gave him predictable occupancy and a public image that photographed elegantly. He cultivated the look. Immaculate tailoring, discreet watches, cars that said "arrived" without shouting. He kept personal meetings brief and documented, insisting every verbal promise be written and time-stamped by day's end. The method built trust with lenders who cared about paper more than personality. By the time peers noticed, his portfolio had stopped being a collection of buildings and become a system. Marriage, for him, lived at the intersection of obligation and alliance. His first wife came from a family with shipping corridors that softened customs bottlenecks and made procurement painless. Contracts that once took months slid across desks in weeks, greased by reputation rather than envelopes. His second wife brought access to a different layer entirely, one of institutional investors and sovereign committees that preferred to deal with people who understood etiquette as fluently as term sheets. Each union expanded his reach without relying on favors that expired. He often said in private notes that stability was an asset class. 3 children arrived into a world already scheduled. Tutors managed their days like project plans, and summers were divided between language programs and quiet trips where business met family on neutral ground. He sent them not to be impressed, but to be prepared, and he measured their progress in habits rather than accolades. At home, he held weekly family councils, short and formal, where even small decisions were framed as trade-offs. He wanted them to internalize that choices have costs, even when money softens consequences. The pattern reflected the way he ran deals. The pivot to the United States began as a hedge against regional volatility. Texas appealed for reasons that sounded technical and felt pragmatic: population inflows, favorable tax treatment, industrial expansion, and a zoning landscape that rewarded persistence. He studied submarkets the way some people study maps, noting cap rates, school districts, and distances to distribution nodes. The first acquisitions were conservative: warehouse conversions, mid-tier retail pads, a garden-style community in a corridor no one bragged about. When those stabilized on schedule, he moved toward a signature purchase, a residence that doubled as a statement and a staging ground. The house with the columns was both home and headquarters. He practiced risk like a craft. He rarely bet on single points of failure, preferring redundancies and backup plans that could be activated with one call. He carried layered insurance and required indemnities that looked fussy until something went wrong. His staff understood the expectation that nothing should depend on luck, and that surprises were symptoms, not excuses. He permitted ambition, but demanded audit trails, and he wanted to know where the weak joints were before anyone tested them. In that world, a breach was not an event, but a lapse. Delegation was the engine of his efficiency and the seed of his exposure. He used assistants for travel and contracts, external counsel for diligence, and trusted property managers with on-the-ground discretion. He issued granular powers of attorney tailored to tasks, utilities, repairs, vendor onboarding, and limited spending thresholds. Two-factor authentication secured the most sensitive accounts, and codes were changed on a quarterly rotation like seasons. He believed that systems protect better than sentiment, and for years that belief was rewarded. The flaw appeared where personal life intersected with professional permissions. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had survived cycles. He had endured currency squeezes and construction defects, court delays and partner disputes that would have sunk smaller egos. Each storm made him more systematic and less tolerant of improvisation, and he began to equate control with safety. Yet control came to mean delegation at scale, and the more he outsourced the routine, the rarer it became for him to handle the delicate. He still knew every major number, but fewer minor ones passed through his hands. In that narrowing, trust became a credential. Those closest to him describe a man who separated rooms in his life and kept doors between them. Family lived in a corridor with photographs and scheduled dinners. Business lived in a corridor with spreadsheets and lawyers on speed dial. The American house touched both corridors and was managed accordingly. Staff badges, vendor logs, and a camera lattice that fed a secure cloud. He liked walking the glass staircase at night, phone in one hand, plan in the other, mapping the next quarter in quiet. The home felt invulnerable because the routines inside it were so well rehearsed. Routines tend to fail where they are most trusted. He respected rules until they slowed him down. Where policy blocked progress, he hired people who could navigate without breaking. He made a habit of asking for the second solution after the first no, and he rewarded employees who brought options rather than obstacles. That culture built a reputation that opened doors and offices far from his passport country. It also trained his circle to believe that any problem could be outthought if one had the right leverage. Some doors, however, do not respond to leverage so much as to proximity. By the start of 2023, his Texas footprint looked like a chessboard mid-game. A few pieces were already settled, a few were gambits awaiting approvals, and one or two were calculated risks whose brilliance or folly would be judged by time. The house functioned as a staging ground for those moves, a place where contractors arrived with mock-ups and lenders with covenants. Schedules were tight, dinners brief, and his phone never silent. He told a confidant in a terse message that the year would be decisive for consolidation. In retrospect, the word reads differently, as if it belonged to another ledger entirely. He was not naive about danger, only accustomed to recognizing it in other shapes. For him, risk looked like interest rate spikes, labor shortages, or a line in a contract that misallocated liability. He did not picture it as a quiet change in who held the codes, or a silent shift in how trust was documented. The infrastructure he built to keep threats outside could not fully account for the ones that entered with permission. That asymmetry is common in lives scaled by delegation. It would matter in ways that paperwork alone could not control. She grew up measuring choices against the price of small necessities. Rent was a calendar event, not a guarantee, and bills were decisions made in sequence. From a young age, she learned to read rooms and anticipate what people wanted to hear before they asked for it. School offered little leverage, so she built another kind: posture, timing, and an unflinching focus on opportunity. Beauty opened doors but never held them. Discipline did. She treated introductions like investments and followed up with the precision of a person who could not afford waste. Her early relationships tracked upward through income brackets. A restaurateur taught her how to order without looking at prices and how to leave without leaving a trace. A consultant introduced her to the language of retainers, per diems, and the myth of deserving. A trader explained risk in metaphors of weather and luck, which she did not believe but memorized anyway. None of these men lasted long, and none needed to. What remained were the habits of access and the phone numbers that survive goodbyes. She curated an image that looked effortless and was anything but. Social feeds showed sunlit tables and muted interiors, never invoices or anxiety. She practiced letting silence do the heavy lifting in conversations and placed her compliments carefully, like cards she did not want to waste. She knew which hotels offered quiet lobbies and which lounges masked their cameras behind tasteful art. Friends saw luck. She kept spreadsheets. The point was not attention. The point was proximity to people who turned choices into outcomes. They met through the kind of dinner that is really a filter. The guest list blended finance with real estate and the soft professions that make both less abrasive. He noticed that she listened with the intent of someone building a map. She noticed that he answered with the concision of someone used to being the point of decision. A week later, she reappeared at a site visit, as if by coincidence, which it was not. She did not push, she offered relief in the form of tasks that removed friction. Access came disguised as errands. She arranged travel, then vendor calls, then a handoff of routine approvals that had clogged his days. Her value was speed without noise, and he rewarded it with more to do. She watched patterns, what touched his temper, what calmed it, where his schedule tolerated delay, where it did not. Assistants became conduits, and she learned their rhythms first. When the inner circle opened, it felt natural because she was already doing the work. Delegated permissions arrived as a series of small expansions. A corporate email alias for vendor scheduling became a login that could see calendar and contacts. A limited payment card for household expenses became a monthly cap high enough to matter. A narrow power of attorney for utilities became a broader mandate to sign service contracts and screen vendors. At each step, she framed the change as administrative cleanup. He signed because she was fixing problems he did not want to remember. She studied the house as if it were a site under development. Sensors, cameras, keypads, and the human habits that made them predictable. She asked for codes under the pretext of emergencies and memorized them as sequences attached to birthdays and milestones. She learned which contractors left side gates unlatched and which vendors propped doors for convenience. She cataloged places where protocol bent to comfort. None of this required force. It required attention. Her world looked elegant from the outside and logistical from within. She tracked which banks processed wires fastest and which compliance officers preferred calls to emails. She learned how policies could be navigated without breaking them, and where an exception could be granted if the right person asked the right way. She added herself as a contact of record for deliveries and service, the kind of detail no one audits until something goes wrong. Each addition lowered the threshold for the next. Systems are easier to extend than to justify. The relationship deepened in the way intense schedules deepen attachment. He returned from flights tired and grateful for stillness that had been arranged in advance. She provided it on time, with no rough edges and no reminders of what it cost. Gratitude became dependence, neatly documented in calendar blocks and terse thank yous that meant more than they read. Dependence translated into trust on paper because it already existed in practice. The distinction matters only to people who fear paper. Her past did not disappear. It adjusted its pitch. Former patrons recognized that she had outgrown the short-term economy of gifts. New acquaintances saw a partner who made things easier for a man who made things happen. She never sold a story about love. She sold competence that looked like care. The arrangement satisfied both until the difference mattered. When lines between personal and professional thinned, she did not ask where they went. She followed the permissions. She built contingencies as if planning for travel. Shell entities with neutral names, accounts with low initial balances, service providers that specialized in discretion rather than advice. None of it was illegal, none of it was random. She filed documents on days when his schedule was dense, knowing that approvals given in motion rarely draw questions. She used small tests to calibrate limits, an extra vendor, a larger invoice, a broader description field, and watched for objections that never came. Each test hardened into routine.
Power, for her, was not noise, but access at will. She liked knowing that she could order repairs without asking and sign for deliveries no one else expected. She liked that staff answered her requests with yes and when, not why. She liked, most of all, that a problem in the house felt like a problem she could solve. In that feeling, money became less a destination than a tool to remove friction. Tools invite use when they fit the hand.
She told herself she was merely securing stability that had been denied to her for years. The narrative made decisions easier to stack without looking down. Stability required planning, and planning required control of practical things, and control required paperwork that looked boring until it wasn't. The line between help and management faded in the pace of busy days. By the time the line mattered, it was not a line anymore. It was a path she had already walked.
At 6:18 p.m., the gate camera recorded the SUV easing in, headlights cutting a white bar across the pavers, and the system logged the usual badge, home. Inside, the kitchen sensor registered motion at 6:22, and the warming drawer ticked on 9 minutes later. At 6:41, the driver texted, complete, and left by the service road without re-entering a code, as he did most evenings. From 7:03 to 7:47, the living room camera captured two figures moving between the sectional sofa and the marble island, one carrying takeout bags, the other a tablet. The house looked exactly like a place designed to absorb fatigue. Lights at 70%, music at a volume that failed to register on the microphone threshold, doors locked by schedule rather than by hand.
The first deviation came small and quiet. At 8:12 p.m., the study door sensor chimed open and closed twice in under a minute, a pattern that normally meant printing and filing. At 8:19, the master keypad accepted a code for partial night, the mode that disarms interior motion and leaves perimeter armed. At 8:21, she appears on the driveway feed in a light jacket, phone to her ear, walking to the sedan that had been left facing out. The gate logs her exit at 8:23 with the resident profile assigned to her key fob, and the neighborhood reader caught the license plate 1 block north at 8:25. Nothing about the departure looked urgent, and nothing about the house suggested concern. Between 8:37 and 8:49, the network began to behave like a room where someone pulled a plug. The upstairs access point dropped, then the downstairs, then the recorder in the equipment closet threw a heartbeat error and went silent. These outages had a signature, not the random stutter of a provider, but the blunt stop of a device lifted from power. The doorbell camera, running on a separate battery, kept a dim trickle of status until its buffer filled and went idle. The system would later show a manual restart at 9:08 p.m., but in the moment there was only quiet in a house that usually talked. Outside the walls, the neighborhood noticed nothing that they recognized as unusual. A jogger cut across the cul-de-sac at 8:53 and did not look toward the columns. A delivery van rolled past at 8:58 and paused to check an address 2 doors down, then drifted on. The street lamp at the corner flickered like it always did before the timer corrected itself. Security patrol drove by at 9:05 on the hour, slowed for the stop sign, and kept going because stops are the point of the routine. From the sidewalk, the house presented the same glass and light it had presented every night that month. At 9:11 p.m., a side gate latch clicked against wood. The microphone on the pool deck captured a thud that could have been a shoe or a dropped tool, then a stretch of ambient nothing. The back terrace sensor, still in partial night mode, noted a door open at 9:14 and logged it as local, no automatic callout, no alarm escalation. Upstairs, a bedside lamp brightened by one dim step, either to find something or to make the room look occupied. 9 minutes can be long enough for 2 decisions and short enough to leave the table set when someone is trying to make a scene appear accidental. At 9:26, the safe accepted a code without error. The keypad recorded a correct sequence, pause, confirm, and the motor whirred the way motors do when they have nothing to argue with. A drawer slid open and did not slam shut.
The microphone caught neither hinge nor clatter. The inventory was not jewelry, not art, papers, drives, a stack clipped with a stainless binder that reflected a line of light onto the wall. A second entry followed 1 minute later, another confirm, as if the first retrieval had suggested a second item worth taking. The room told one story, and the objects told another. A vase lay cracked in 3 large pieces near the interior threshold. Its shards fanned toward the desk, the way glass travels when force moves from inside out. 2 drawers sat dangling, their contents poured out in neat concentrations that stopped short of the baseboard. The closet door stood ajar a hand's width, with no drag mark on the carpet, which meant no rush and no panic. A chair had been tipped and righted. Its leg left a shallow arc in the wool that ended under the desk, where someone wiped a print they could still feel with their skin. The scene worked if you glanced. It failed if you stayed. Downstairs, the refrigerator door alarm chirped a delayed protest at 9:29 and self-silenced, a reminder that a bottle had been moved and not returned. A pantry light came on and off within a minute, not enough time to search for anything that mattered, enough to look like someone had looked. In the mudroom, the motion sensor woke to a body passing, and the bench cushion bore a fresh crease at one end. Near the back stair, a faint dust print the size of a palm kissed the wall where someone steadied themselves without thinking. None of these items were expensive. All of them were specific. The timeline tightened toward the bedroom. At 9:31, the master door opened, and 2 minutes later, the lamp went bright enough to leave a rectangle on the floor. There were no shouts captured, no struggle that moved furniture, and no scrape that registered louder than breath. The coroner would later say the interval between surprise and silence can be counted in small numbers when a plan allows no argument. On the bedspread, a shallow impression suggested a knee near the edge, the sort of balance people find when reaching across distance. The clock on the nightstand kept time without witnessing it. Outside again, a truck idled briefly where engines are not supposed to idle. A camera 2 houses down pointed past a hedge and saw shapes without faces at 9:36, shapes that did not look up because they knew which doorbells use their own motion sensors. The side gate latch clicked again, this time softer on exit, and the latch did not fully seat. The pool recorded a ripple that had nothing to do with wind. Somewhere in the chain, a glove failed to leave a print and succeeded in leaving a fiber. At 9:34, she called 911. The recording is the kind that dispatchers do not forget. Breath first, words next, and the tightness of a person reporting what they want the world to hear. She said someone was in the house and gave the address with the speed of practice. The line held while the operator asked if she was safe, and she said she was outside, and footsteps sounded like weather through the phone. When she hung up, she called back once more without speaking, a pocket of static lasting 3 seconds. That, too, found its place in the chronology. Officers made entry at 9:46, with the guard at the gate still calling up the homeowner file. They moved room by room as protocols require, and the house gave them nothing until it gave them everything. The bedroom presented its geometry and then its absence. A pulse check failed, and the first officers stepped back to make room for the clockwork of a scene. The radio traffic used calm words to describe irreversible facts because calm words are the only words the radio knows. Behind the order lay a map of how the night had been shaped. Systems that should have shouted were convinced to whisper. A routine that had been choreographed for comfort was borrowed for timing. What entered the house did not break it. It occupied it, used its permissions, and left the surfaces telling 2 stories at once. One story said chaos, the other said choice. The difference would live in the minutes, and the minutes were already written. The first clue looked disposable, a blue nitrile glove half buried under the rosemary hedge by the rear terrace. It carried no usable prints, but its interior held a faint mix of skin cells and carpet fibers that matched the wool pile from the study. Near the glove, a bent staple lay in the gravel, the kind used to tack low-voltage cable along baseboards.
Investigators photographed the staple, then traced the line of disturbed pebbles back toward the side gate. The pattern suggested someone knelt there longer than panic would allow. Scenes that rush rarely leave orderly arcs.
Inside the study, the safe's keypad offered better testimony than any witness. The logs showed two correct entries, 9:26 p.m. and 9:27 p.m., with no failed attempts preceding them. That meant the intruder did not guess. He knew or had seen the sequence before. A subtle smear of oil crossed the number 4, the kind a fingertip leaves when a person covers the input while entering. The safe's motor recorded a normal cycle rather than a forced reversal, a detail property crimes detectives mark in their notebooks. Codes remembered are more dangerous than locks defeated. On the desk, a single stainless binder clip reflected a thin line of light in every crime scene photo. Under magnification, its inner surfaces showed micro-scratches consistent with recent removal from a thicker stack. The drawer inventory later confirmed that documents relating to domestic LLCs and a property schedule for 3 Texas assets were missing. A portable drive bay held an empty slot with dust rings disturbed and a faint rectangular outline on the leather blotter. Nothing expensive to strangers had moved. Everything valuable to someone with context was gone. Theft that understands asset structures looks kitey from the outside. The router cabinet in the utility closet told a parallel story. Dust outlines marked where the UPS had been unplugged and slid out, then pushed back a few millimeters off its original footprint. The cabinet floor carried a light scuff angled toward the door, as if a boot nudged the panel while reaching inside. Router logs showed a hard power loss at 8:37 p.m., followed by a manual restart at 9:08 p.m., a window large enough for a visit that wanted fewer eyes. Forensics swabbed the cabinet lip and recovered a trace of polymer consistent with a tool handle, not a hand. A house that goes silent by switch tends to do so on purpose. In the mudroom, a faint palm print in dust hugged the wall at shin height, 5 ovals and a partial heel. Chemical processing lifted no ridge detail, but the spacing matched a larger hand compensating for load. A bench cushion bore a fresh diagonal crease ending near a cubby where boot trays were stored. The tray showed a single wet footprint drying from the edges inward, size 44 by the scale card, with a distinctive chevron lug pattern rarely sold in local boutiques. A search of regional retailers narrowed the brand to a construction line carried by 2 big box stores. Chevrons always look generic until you count them. Outside, the side lane reader that manages neighborhood traffic produced a short list of plates moving past the gate. At 9:19 p.m., a dark pickup without a front plate rolled by, and the rear camera caught a partial, TX3L7. Local patrol flagged 3 possible registrations, one of them a long bed registered to a man known as K to pawn shop owners and metal yards. His name had floated through property crime briefings for a decade, a prospector who traded odd jobs for cash and sometimes for things not his. Detectives pulled his last 2 citations and the cameras from the gas station he favored. The footage would matter later. The phone records arrived under a geofence warrant 3 days in. The anonymized list of devices that touched a cellular handshake within 100 meters of the property between 9 and 9:40 p.m. looked like static until time filters thinned the crowd. One device pinged near the side lane at 9:17, then near the gas station at 10:07, then went dark. When the numbers were de-anonymized under court order, that device traced back to a prepaid account purchased with cash at a store 3 exits south. The store's camera caught a man in a work jacket and cap, face half-turned, paying for the phone and a roll of tape. Prepaid phones are designed to be forgettable. Cameras are not. The same burner reached a VoIP handle that had exchanged messages the week before with an account freshly created on an encrypted app. The messages were short and logistical: gate hours, a sketch of the floor plan, placement of the safe, and a line that read "code scene." Metadata tied that VoIP to an IP address used hours earlier to query an insurance broker's portal for coverage details on the house.
The IP, in turn, matched a device that had been inside the residence many times in the prior month, logging in as a trusted user to arrange deliveries and vendors. The chain did not show motive, it showed access. Access is often motive's shadow. Behind the house, a patch of damp soil along the hedge held a partial knee impression. The soil chemistry revealed chlorinated water residue stronger than the sprinkler system would leave, pointing to transfer from poolside contact that night. Microscopic paint flecks embedded in the impression matched the side gate's recent touch-up color, confirming passage in and out with the same gate. A second glove turned up near the pool equipment pad, tucked behind a PVC elbow where someone had crouched. The pair, bagged and sealed, framed a path that respected cameras by avoiding them. At the A to B level, detectives mapped a clean route. Side gate, terrace, study, stairs, master, exit. At the B to C level, they mapped intent. Silence the network, open the safe with knowledge, ignore display pieces, remove documents, and stage drawers for theater. A neighbor's driveway camera added a final beat at 9:36 p.m., capturing the silhouette of a long bed reversing with brake lights pulsing twice before it slipped beyond a hedge line. The truck's tailgate had a dent that matched a police photo from a prior stop involving Kay. That kind of dent becomes a fingerprint when you need one. When Kay was picked up on a traffic pretext, his boots wore the same chevron lugs, edges loaded with a residue of decomposed granite and synthetic turf crumb. In his garage, officers found a prepaid phone still warm from a charge and a cheap cap with fibers close to the nitrile glove interior. The gas station video stitched him to time, the side lane reader stitched him to place, the boot print stitched him to movement. None of it, alone, proved the larger story. Together, they drew lines that crossed in the study at 9:26 p.m. The last clue to fall into place was small and domestic. In the kitchen trash, a receipt lay folded under coffee grounds, time-stamped the morning before for a notary service a few miles away. The service had verified identity for a power of attorney amendment limited to U.S. properties and routine vendor management. The notary's log showed two signers, the homeowner and a proxy authorized to coordinate household contracts. The receipt was not a weapon, but it was a key. Keys explain doors. Doors explain who walks through without knocking. Her account began neatly. She said she left at 8:21 for a late class and tea with a friend, checked the house cameras from her phone when she felt something off, and returned to find the place not right. On paper, that sounded like caution, the reaction of someone paying attention. The problem started where electronics refused to cooperate. The camera system had been offline, and the app logs showed no successful view from her device during the period she claimed. The distance between story and signal became the first gap investigators measured. Location data widened it. Her phone's GPS reported a clean drive away from the house and a stop near the friend's address, but the health app told a different story. Hundreds of steps logged while the device did not move beyond a 10-meter radius. Steps without displacement imply either a treadmill or a second device doing the walking. The friend confirmed that the phone sat in the car while they caught up inside, a detail that begged the obvious question of what counted as presence. When EXIF data from her social photo confirmed the image had been taken the day before, not that night, the timeline lost its anchor. Timelines are only as strong as the metadata that holds them. The house contributed its own rebuttal. Smart lock records showed the side door opening at 8:53 with a privileged user credential assigned to her profile. The entry lasted under 2 minutes and did not trigger a perimeter alert because partial night mode ignores interior motion. Immediately after, the network went dark by power loss, not provider fault, and returned by a manual restart minutes after the 911 call. That choreography looked less like coincidence and more like choreography. Systems that fail by design tend to fail on cue.
Financial logs carried the theme forward. In the weeks prior, she had expanded a limited power of attorney into a broader instrument covering service contracts, vendor selection, and certain operating expenses for U.S. assets. The amendment was properly notarized and stored, which is to say it lived exactly where someone who manages a household would put it. Under that umbrella, she added herself as a point of contact with the insurance broker and requested copies of the policy schedule, citing upcoming renovations. The broker noted her courtesy and speed. Speed in administrative life often passes for necessity. The communication stack stitched people to moments. A prepaid number that appeared inside the geofence near the house at 917 had, a week earlier, messaged a VoIP handle containing details about the floor plan, the safe's location, and gate hours. The VoIP handle logged in from an IP address that, hours before, accessed the broker's portal to retrieve specific pages about personal property and scheduled items. That IP resolved to a device that frequented the residence and logged in under her trusted profile. None of this explicitly announced intent, but it explained how knowledge traveled. Knowledge tends to ride the rails of convenience. When Kay was brought in on a traffic pretext, the circle tightened. He first denied knowing the address, then conceded he might have driven past the neighborhood because he knew a guy in landscaping. The boots, the station footage, and the partial plate ate away at his confidence. And the burner phone tucked in an oil-stained toolbox matched the anonymized identifier from the geofence. When confronted with the VoIP messages, he asked for a lawyer and then for a deal. Deals sometimes function as mirrors. He described a woman who had all the doors open and a plan to make it look like a smash and grab, supplied with times and a promise that papers, not diamonds, mattered. Investigators treated his account cautiously, lining it up against independent clocks. They checked the house logs, the gas station timestamp, the neighborhood reader, and the network outage to see where story met record. Alignment appeared in unglamorous places. The minute of the safe opening, the small pause before a second retrieval, the idle of an engine captured by a microphone meant to hear birds. He did not know the make of the safe, but knew it would not need prying. He did not name the model of the router, but knew the box had to be off. Specific ignorance can be as telling as specific knowledge. People tend to remember what they were told to do. Her defense leaned on habit and serendipity. She had authority because she needed it to run a complex household. She checked insurance because renovations require it. She left because routines keep people sane. Investigators acknowledged each point and returned to the few that routine seldom explains: a privileged door opening while she was supposedly away, a network unplugged by hand during the same window, and a message chain that taught an outsider to move like an insider. The friend's account helped less than intended when it confirmed that the phone stayed in the car for comfort. Comfort does not audit entry logs. Digital forensics added a quiet layer. The tablet registered a brief handshake with the home Wi-Fi at 8:52, a ghost of presence that should not have happened if she had fully left. The garage keypad recorded no use, but the service door sensor spiked twice in the same 2-minute window as the side door. A single notification from a smart thermostat showed a manual set point change upstairs at 9:30. The kind of adjustment a person makes to see more clearly when a room feels dim. These were not smoking guns. They were normal behaviors in abnormal sequence. Sequence is where stories harden into facts. Asset movement traced intent more clearly than objects taken. 3 small transfers left a household account in the week before the incident, each routed to new LLCs with neutral names and freshly minted EINs. Vendor onboarding emails showed her as the requester for accounts tied to those entities, and a draft management agreement in her cloud drive contained placeholders for property addresses that matched items from the missing schedule. The amounts were too small to alarm a busy principal and too tidy to be an accident. People who intend control practice on small levers before they pull larger ones. By the time the case file moved to a charging decision, the narrative rested less on what anyone felt and more on what the infrastructure reported.
She had motive in the form of planned control and prospective claims, means in the form of coded access and administrative reach, and opportunity bounded by log entries that placed her at the right door at the wrong time. K supplied corroboration where machines did not speak plainly, and the house supplied corroboration where K might lie. The alignment did not make the night less tragic, it made the shape of the night harder to call accidental. Jury selection moved slowly because the address and the surname drew attention beyond the courthouse steps. Prosecutors kept questions practical. Who trusted digital logs? Who had managed household accounts? Who understood that a staged scene can look ordinary? The defense sought jurors wary of circumstantial mosaics, people who believed that coincidences cluster. By opening statements, both sides promised clarity from the same facts. The judge reminded them that clarity belongs to evidence, not to volume. Outside, cameras watched a door that never has much to say. The state framed its case around three pillars: motive as planned control, means as privileged access, and opportunity as a clock that refused to lie. They began with infrastructure rather than emotion, walking jurors through router logs, door entries, and device handshakes in the order they occurred. A forensic analyst demonstrated the difference between a provider outage and a manual power cut using the house's own records. The safes log appeared next, the twin entries at 926 and 927 displayed in quiet black type. The point was simple: someone knew, not guessed. Knowledge, the prosecutor said, travels on relationships before it travels on paper. K took the stand under a cooperation agreement that turned on corroboration, not theater. He spoke flatly about receiving times and a floor sketch, about the instruction to ignore watches and take papers, not diamonds. He admitted to the burner, the gas station stop, and the boots that matched the chevrons. He did not claim to know her heart, he claimed to know his orders. Cross-examination pressed him on prior thefts and inconsistencies, which he conceded in part. The judge instructed jurors to measure him by whether independent clocks agreed with his minutes. Digital forensics filled gaps his memory glossed over. A network engineer explained the offline window and the manual restart, mapping outage to movement with diagrams that looked like subway maps. A data examiner traced the VoIP handle to the IP that queried the insurance portal hours earlier, then tied that IP to a device logged into the residence as a trusted profile. Another analyst contrasted the GPS track from her phone with the health steps that implied a body in motion while the device stayed parked. The exhibits were plain, almost dull, and that was the point. Dull records do not show off, they keep time. The defense leaned on the ordinary. They argued that she held authority because the house demanded it, that notaries and broker logins meant diligence, not design. They suggested that geofence warrants scoop up innocence, that metadata misleads, that a friend's tea is not a conspiracy. When pressed on the privileged door opening at 8:53 and the immediate network silence, counsel floated the possibility of a staffer's mistake. The staffer, on the stand, owned small errors and denied that one. Jurors watched a key fob log point to a name that did not change. Character witnesses tried to redraw the outline. A contractor said she paid invoices on time and answered questions faster than most clients. A neighbor said she smiled easily and picked up packages for others. A former colleague called her organized in a way that made things feel safe. None of them could place her at 9:26 p.m. in a way that broke the sequence the house had already written. Character softens edges. Sequence draws lines. The case lived where lines intersect. Closing arguments avoided drama and returned to architecture. The state argued that systems, not people, placed her at the door, at the router, and at the safe by implication of knowledge she should not have had. The defense warned against building a life sentence from logs and a cooperator with motive to lie. The judge told jurors that reasonable doubt is not speculative doubt, and that the law asks for reason, not perfection.
Deliberations lasted 9 hours across 2 days. The note they sent out at noon asked to see the door and network exhibits one more time. The verdict split the roles cleanly. K was convicted of felony murder and burglary in the course of a violent crime, with enhancement for use of a deadly instrument during the commission of a theft. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, facilitation of burglary, and fraud tied to instrumental documents used to obtain control. The jury acquitted her on a count that alleged direct physical participation inside the bedroom, a distinction that mattered to the record more than to the outcome. Sentencing reflected those boundaries. Life for Kay under state statute, 35 years for her with parole eligibility distant enough to feel academic. The judge's remarks ran short and spare. Appeals followed the usual routes. Her counsel challenged admission of the geofence return, arguing overbreadth and insufficient particularity. The appellate panel affirmed, citing limiting steps and independent corroboration. They challenged the VoIP to IP linkage as unreliable. The panel noted the chain of custody and the device's repeated presence on the home network. They questioned the cooperation agreement's incentives. The court answered that juries are told how to weigh such testimony and did so alongside records that neither forgot nor improved over time. Nothing in the record moved enough to alter the gravity of the result. The mandate issued without fanfare.
The civil side unfolded in parallel. The heirs petitioned to void transfers made under the expanded power of attorney and to remove her from any role touching U.S. assets. A probate judge froze accounts tied to the household entities and appointed a receiver to unwind contracts that existed for convenience rather than necessity. Insurance litigation narrowed to scheduled property and exclusions for intentional acts, with the broker producing logs that showed who downloaded what and when. The house itself went quiet, then to market, then to another name behind another LLC. Estates close, grief does not.
In the end, the courtroom did what courtrooms can do, and left the rest to silence. The prosecutor did not call it closure, the family did not call it justice, the defense did not call it fair. Outside, the story grew smaller each week in the news cycle, and larger in a household that no longer had routine to hold it together. Systems resumed their hum in other homes with other codes and other hands. The lesson, if there was one, hid in the ordinary, where most of this had lived all along. The judge's last words to the jury echoed longer than the camera stayed. He reminded them that verdicts are statements about evidence, and that evidence often comes from places people do not notice until they need to. He thanked them for attention to details that looked like utilities and door chimes. He did not offer a moral, he offered a boundary. The rest belonged to those who would live with its shape.
Sometimes we hand out the keys to our life ourselves, out of trust, exhaustion, or love. Powers of attorney, passwords, small errands, none of these are everyday gestures. They are access points to your fate. If you recognize this outline in your own relationship, set boundaries in facts, not promises. Legal review, separate signing authority, limits, and action logging. Love does not cancel compliance.